Okay, so it says we are live. Hello, everybody. And let me just pull up the stream too for us here so I can find us. Okay. So John Kenneth, is it Muir?
It's actually Muir. Like
Muir. I said it wrong.
that's
Every time.
okay.
John
Listen,
Kenneth Muir.
it's
Yeah.
not the easiest name to pronounce. Rhymes with fewer. So you don't
Yeah.
want to say sewer, but it rhymes with sewer.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a terrible reference, but
That
on
is.
Halloween, maybe sewer is kind of a apropos. First of all, happy Halloween and welcome to the Small Talk Live Substack. Super excited to talk to you today. We are going to be talking about primarily 80s and 90s horror movies. This is sort of the era of Freddy Krueger and Jason and Michael Myers and Hannibal Lecter, and oh my god, it just goes on and on and on. It really is like the golden era of horror films. Certainly the time, it seems to me, when like slasher films went mainstream.
Right.
And you and I are both Gen Xers, and we both grew up in this era. And so I wanted to just talk about, I mean, why not, what day better than Halloween to talk about scary movies, because we all love them. Just to tell you a little bit about John Kenneth Muir, now I can say it, sewer. Yeah, he's really one of the big writers and historians of the genre. He has written, you've written a bunch of books. One is called Horror Films of the 1980s, and then he's written Horror Films of the 1990s. You also have a blog, right?
I do. Yes.
I have a blog, which is called what?
It's JKM. I'd shorten my name to JKM. Reflections on Film and Classic Television. So.
That's awesome. And so really good to read that. He's written about all these movies, from the mainstream to the sort of more niche genre ones. So you are an expert. Thank you for coming on the show to talk about scary things, and hopefully we don't freak our. And one of the reasons I listen, I've got this. I've got a little board. So, oh God, sorry. So happy Halloween. Sure. Let me just make sure that we are streaming live, because I just like to make sure the technology is working here. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are working. This is working, and we got 10 people so far joining us, and we'll have lots more as we keep going.
That's great.
Yeah. So, John, first of all, how did you get into? Tell me about your how did you fall into this world of horror films? Like, how did you become an expert? Why are you a big fan? Tell me why are you what kind of twisted person are you?
Exactly. What is wrong with me?
Right, exactly.
Well, John, first I want to say thank you so much for having me on Small Talk. I'm really happy to be here with you today on Halloween of all days. What a wonderful way to join you. I began, I guess, my love of horror very young, and sort of surprisingly. It was 1975, and my parents put me down in front of the TV, and a TV show called Space 1999 was airing.
Okay.
And it's a science fiction show, to be clear, but there are many horror overtones in it. And I think the second episode that aired was called Dragon's Domain. And it was this episode about this horrible monster, like, that was like in a spider's web of like trapped spaceships. And when astronauts would get on the ship with it, it would hypnotize them and like suck them into its
That's scary.
steaming maw, and like after a second it would spit out their steaming bones, right?
Ooh.
And I mean, so it was made in Great Britain with an American cast, but it was very frightening, because at the time I was, 5, 6 years old, and I loved Star Trek and Lost in Space, and I loved Space 1999. But it introduced me to that kind of concept of the Lovecraftian horror, right? This sort of incredible idea that we could be so advanced to go to space, and yet like we're still down on the food chain to, some kind of alien creature, right?
Yeah.
So this was before Alien, by a couple years, things like that. And then I got to middle school, and my love of horror sort of became cemented by a viewing of a 1980s horror film from Tobe Hooper, the director of the Chainsaw Massacre. It was called The Funhouse. Oh my gosh, it scared me to death.
Right.
And at the same time that it scared me, I kind of became obsessed with it. I was like, I'm scared of this. Do I like it? Do I not like it?
Right, like,
What's
that's a weird reaction we have to scare, like, I don't this is, like, making me very unhappy and scared, and yet I wanna keep watching it, like, what is it?
Exactly, like, this really upset me, but I also felt something, adrenaline,
Yeah,
right? I burned some calories watching it, that
right.
kind of thing, and, so I became fascinated with sort of all forms of horror, and when I went to college, I got a concentration in film, and what I began to understand at that point, as a young man, which was a very long time ago for me, the,
Not as
sort
long
of
as me.
I began to understand, how film is put together, and how horror uses really this incredible film language or film grammar, this imagery, symbolism, things like that to scare us. And so I was very lucky. My first book was published. I wrote it in 1994, but it came out in 1997, and it was about Space 1999, the show
Okay.
with the monster.
Yep.
Right? But then I thought, the publisher McFarland, who I love, they asked me for a second book, and what did I want to do? And by that point, I had become obsessed with the films of Wes Craven,
Mm,
one of the great horror movie directors, Nightmare on Elm Street, very disturbing, Last House on the Left. And I wrote that book, and it was very well received. And to me, it was just fascinating writing about how these films are put together, how we read as audiences the imagery in them, and why they're effective, why they scare us, things like that. So,
yeah,
y-
it's interesting
I
the psychology of it, and
yeah,
there are, like, kinda tropes, that horror movies have, and of course, Scream kind of made fun of those in
hmm
some ways or kind of brought those to our
absolutely,
attention in a really clever way, but it's almost like as you go into a horror movie, you almost expect it has to have these certain beats or tropes, otherwise, it's not gonna really work, like,
right.
like, there has to be these, like you said, this imagery, this sort of rhythm of it, but, what is I do you think there's something about people being scared, but in a kind of controlled environment where you can be scared, but you know that at the end of the day, like the scary is going to go away or something. I know there's something about because people like the thrill of being scared, like the
Right.
adrenaline it gives them. Yet when you see a movie, there it's not like you're really actually like being scared, like in a real situation. So yeah, I wonder if
Right.
there's something about that.
Yeah, so one of the things I also do is I teach communication studies.
Mm,
I'm an associate professor. I get to teach film sometimes, so
very
most of the
fun.
time I get to teach communication, including mass media and things like that. And so there are some theories about this, and one theory, of course, which I disagree with vehemently, is that horror movies make people violent. And what I say is, to my classroom, how many of you have seen a horror movie? Yeah,
Right.
everyone raises their hand. How many of you killed somebody? No hands
Right.
are up.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, let's dismiss that one, right? But the other theory is that horror films, create a kind of catharsis, or I like the term crucible, or gauntlet for us to run in a very safe way. We're not actually in danger, thankfully,
Hmm.
watching a horror movie, but our body responds as if we are. I joked a minute ago about burning calories, but horror movies do burn calories. If you watch The Shining, sitting there watching that film, you're going to burn about the same amount of calories you would walking vigorously for 30 minutes.
Oh wow, Zone 2
Yeah,
workout. Yeah, that's
Ye
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So tonight, if you don't wanna go exercise, just watch a couple horror movies, you're in good shape, right? But
Horror movies, not only scary, but good for you.
good for you,
Yeah,
exactly, and I do think they're pro-social as well in many cases, not all of them, but, uh, the idea here is that we identify with the protagonists in the films, and we imagine ourselves in those scenarios. That's why, so often, and I know now we're in the streaming era, but pre-streaming, it was great fun to see a horror movie with an audience because it becomes this audience participation event where everybody's screaming, don't run upstairs, don't
right.
open that door, don't go back in, right? Don't go back for the cat, Ripley. Get out of that
Yeah.
spaceship. And that's that idea of us responding as if we're in that scenario, and so we're working through those things. There's sort of a catharsis we get from that, and it's very safe because there's no danger to us.
Right.
Sometimes people will compare watching a horror movie and the experience you have there to riding a roller coaster, for instance. But
Mhm.
like, I'm even more chicken because there's less to be afraid of in a horror movie than actually riding a roller coaster.
I heard somebody comparing even a horror movie to comedy in a way that it has the same kind of beats and expectations, and like
Mhm.
there's a kind of it's the same rhythm in a way. Like it has the same beat. It's funny because it's the opposite extreme, right? But it's also the same release,
It
you
it
have.
it is. There is such a connection between the laugh and the scream, and if you look at genres, comedy is closely aligned with horror. So in comedy, we have the mockumentary. You turn that just a little bit, and it's the found footage horror movie. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I've done in the last years, I have made my own web series called Abnormal Fixation,
Oh yeah.
and it's like a quasi mockumentary found footage thing that sort of goes between mockumentary comedy and found footage horror because they're so close. I mean, you just flip a switch and you're on one side or the other side.
Yep.
So Wes Craven, again, to bring him up, often said that, and you've mentioned Scream, that you twist things just a little, and you're getting a laugh or a scream, or you're getting both at the same time if you're
Right.
very
That's the best.
skillful.
Yeah,
Right, that's
that's
the
the
best,
best. I'm
like
sure
Wes
a
Craven
director's like,
was.
I got my laugh and my scream at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
Scream is one of my favorites. But let's go back pre-Scream to the 80s, which is when you and I both were, teenagers or whatever, middle
Right.
school. And that was sort of the era of the slasher film. At least there
Yes.
was a lot of different types of films that came out during that time. It seemed like, I always think back in my old days as that was the golden era, but it did seem like there were some
Yeah.
incredible movies that came out in the like late 70s, early 80s. Movies like Halloween and Friday the
Right.
13th.
Right.
Um, Talk to me about that. And those are like the John Carpenter films, like It,
Hmm.
and I'm not It, The Thing.
Right.
Um, and talk to me about like what the origin of the slasher film specifically, because there's all these different genres of horror, right? So there's the slasher film, which is like these really violent, like knives, and things like that. Why did that? Why do you know why that was such a big thing? Like that became such a big thing in like the 80s and the late 70s.
Right. So the slasher movement, some people, look at Halloween as sort of like the legitimate start of that in
Mhm.
1978 of the slasher film movement, because Halloween was so successful. It was, it made a ton of money. At the time it became like the most successful independent film ever made.
Wow.
And it got really great critical reviews and great word of mouth. So it was like this little movie that could, but other people will go back and they'll remember, Black Christmas from the
Mhm.
earlier, so that
Right.
Olivia Hussey in it and Keir
Yeah.
Dullea, right? Which also began dealing with some of these kind of slasher tropes. But what we were looking at there in the 70s was the transition in horror away from what the previous generation had grown up with, which were these sort of Hammer horror, very colorful remakes of gothic like stories like
Like
Frankenstein,
monster movies,
Dracula.
right? Like I'm
Right,
wearing
right.
this shirt today, Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yes, and I
You
love the
remember?
Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, that was a great
Great
one.
movie.
And I
Oh,
do
I love
remember
it.
watching those like when I was home sick from school, like the
Yeah.
monster. There was always the monster movie thing that was
Yes.
going on. Right.
But horror began to shift, and this is sort of the great or not so great, depending whether you like it or not, shift in film history altogether. It was around the 70s we began moving sort of from less artifice to sort of what we're looking at as more realism or naturalism in film.
Yeah.
So instead of having this gothic film, with women in diaphanous gowns and the bloody fangs and the vampires, everything became sort of grounded in a different kind of natural reality. So it's like we move the horror to a suburban American town.
Right.
Our heroines are
We we're
not
in
vampire.
Transylvania anymore. Now we're in like,
Right, exactly, right.
Ohio. Right.
And our heroes are babysitters. They're just regular people living regular days and nights. And the monster comes into this setting, but the monster again has been then shorn of the kind of mythological touches we would associate, like a vampire, a
Mhm.
werewolf, right? So those touches have been removed, and instead we're getting this. Michael Myers was originally called like the Shape, right?
Mhm.
Because we didn't really know in the first film why he was killing her, what he was. That was the mystery. That was sort of the most like ambiguous or
Yeah.
artificial thing in the film. But otherwise, it was a very
Like real.
uh, grounded, real, naturalistic film. No real touch of the supernatural. A cross was not going to save you from
Yeah.
Michael Myers, a crucifix, right? And and so when the slasher films took off, in the early 80s, they were all of that bent. Like Friday the 13th, same thing, incredibly naturalistic, no supernatural. Now, by the time we got to the mid 80s, Wes Craven had put a twist on it with the Nightmare on Elm Street films,
Mhm.
where Freddy was the slasher, but he could kill you in your dreams.
Yeah.
And like the supernatural and mythic elements started coming back in, films like Hellraiser, things like that. But for
Yeah.
a period there, from about 1978 to maybe 1984, 1985, Elm Street was 84, but a lot of other films hadn't yet followed that trend. We were in that trend of like really naturalistic films where it's like, this is somebody who's going to like come after you and like kill you with a knife. Some
Right.
critic called them, knife kill films. Roger Ebert called them dead teenager films. But they were really grounded in this kind of kitchen sink reality and didn't have those gothic or um, supernatural elements to them, because I think people were looking to have more realism in their films at that
Yeah.
point.
And that kind of coincides, at least in the late 70s, with the kinds of movies that were coming out at that time.
Hmm.
Um, you kind
That's
of
right.
more natural realism, not always a happy ending. Um,
Right.
yeah, that's interesting.
Exactly.
There's also like really good characters, like I almost feel like the best characters came out of that era, like Freddy and Mike Myers and Jason. You know,
Right.
do you think do you think that was the best era for like creating these, I don't know, these villains, right? But they weren't really villains in the traditional sense. They were like these, like you said, like the mysterious, we don't even know who Jason is, until much.
Right.
And then of course, there's Halloween. Now there's like Friday the 13th, 24, which I don't watch all of them. I don't know if you've watched every single
Right.
one of them.
I
But what
try to
was it?
keep up with them,
Oh,
but
that's cool.
yeah. So for me, like I did grow up with those characters and I love them. But I have to say, I do remember, and I was still writing. Like I began writing in an era where the prevailing sort of critics at the time were of the previous generation.
Hmm.
The generation that grew up to appreciate the Hammer films and things like that. And so
Yeah.
they were slamming Friday the 13th and
Right. They
Halloween
like
and
the old
Nightmare,
stuff.
that these are garbage movies, and now I'm so old. It's like
Yeah.
now, there's a new generation of horror movies and the critics are me and they're saying like, well, it's not as good as Halloween.
Right. No,
There's
I don't want
always
to.
that.
I want to. I've been seeing some horror movies recently, and there's some really good horror movies. Like Weapons
Absolutely.
is great.
Yeah.
Is a great movie. I mean, me and my wife, and I mean my wife, my daughter, my wife is terrified of horror movies. I can only go with my 16-year-old daughter, and she loves horror movies, so we see everything. But there's some great. I feel like there's actually a renaissance in
Yeah.
scary movies right now.
I,
Yeah.
I think so too, and because I review movies, I try to stay very open to them. Like my affectionate heart, of course, is with Michael and
Of
Jason and
course.
Freddy and
You love what you grew
Chucky,
up with.
because
Yeah.
I grew up
Chucky's
with them.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course I do love those, so much, and I definitely see the value in them. But I mean, I remember. I don't know if you remember too, but in the early 80s, like the moral majority. So
Yeah.
everybody was out for horror movies in the 80s. The
Right.
moral majority, the far right, was out to destroy them. The far left, like extreme, like feminist groups, they were like, this is like the equivalent of pornography. It's like everyone on the left hated the horror movies,
You
and
can't.
everybody
You
on
couldn't
the
win.
right hated horror
Yeah.
movies, And they're telling you how bad and how awful and how culture destroying, Friday the 13th
This
is.
is why they were so popular. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it was
Thank
a big
you.
deal to go see these movies.
I can't
And
believe
it,
my parents let me. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, of course, here I am taking my 16-year-old daughter to these movies, but and even before, even when she was much younger. But I mean, I think I saw Friday the 13th when I was like 12 years old. Like there was
absolutely.
no there was no filter. I don't even know how I got in. I guess they didn't care back then.
Right.
I mean, did
And
everybody else get into these movies? I got into everything. I mean, I think I walked into any of those R-rated. Some of them, I remember seeing an X-rated horror movie, which is
oh my gosh.
it was called Maniac.
Oh gosh, Maniac.
You know
Yes. Yeah.
Maniac?
Oh, I do know Maniac. Yes.
It was a
That's a
weird movie with like
notorious
it's a notorious
1980s,
yeah,
1980, I think.
terrible movie, but it was but I mean it wasn't terrible. I don't really remember it that well other than I think I might have rented that one. But just like being really scared because we were watching an X-rated, X for
Right.
violence. Yeah, that was a thing. Are there some movies from that time? Well, first of all, do you have a favorite from that kind of 70s, 80s genre?
I am a huge fan of the original Halloween, of course.
Yeah.
Toby Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was like 1974, I believe.
Wow.
So, a little before Halloween, but not
Amazing.
exactly a slasher. I don't know exactly what you
Yeah.
call
What is
it.
that movie? Yeah.
It's brilliant, but I don't know exactly how I'd pigeonhole. I wouldn't say it's
Yeah.
exactly a slasher. Um, I love Nightmare on Elm Street. I think those are just great films from that era. Chainsaw, Halloween, and Elm Street. Those are
And those
three of my
became,
favorites.
yeah. And those became franchises too.
Right.
And you said you've watched like all of them. Do you think some of the franchises are better than others?
Oh gosh, it's really interesting because they really go through their appearance are like, oh, the Elm Street series is better, and then it goes down. It's like, oh, the
Right.
Halloween series is looking up, and then it goes down,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh
Depends what
wow,
director got a hold of it. Yeah.
yeah. So they all vacillate wildly. I
Like
mean, there
Alien.
are some terrible Halloween movies out there.
Yeah.
But there's some great ones, and there are some terrible Friday the 13th movies, but some ones I absolutely love. And the great thing about horror is that we accept each other, and if you love one and someone else doesn't, it's okay. I mean, I'm a fan of that crazy Friday the 13th film where Jason goes to space. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people don't
That's
like it,
hilarious.
but Jason X, I think it's an absolute riot. I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I feel like the whole thing is like a riff on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Right.
But with if Jason were in Star Trek: The Next Generation, on a holodeck or something,
Yeah.
and
So
and
good.
I just adore that. I mean, listen, what to me, it's like at that point, was that the ninth or tenth?
Right.
Um, Friday the 13th. You might as well have fun, right? Right?
Right. Right.
What are you going to do
Yeah.
at
What are you
this
going to do
point?
at this point?
Right.
Um, are there movies that you think are, you know, overlooked or kind of underrated from that era? Like somebody was like, ask him about Ghost Story. It's funny. I don't really even remember. I remember seeing Ghost Story when I was a
Oh
kid. I
yeah.
couldn't tell you because I remember Fred Astaire was in it, but I could not tell you one thing about that movie. I mean, I don't know if that one stood up. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. But
It's
are there
really.
movies that are forgotten from that era?
I think so. I mean, and I think Ghost Story is a good example. I'd give high props to the person who mentioned that to you
Remember
because
that?
it's
Yeah.
probably not like the first 50 films you'd mention from the 80s, but it's a really good one, and maybe
I
it
think
should
it's a
be.
good one. I remember
Yeah.
liking that movie, but I
Yeah.
could not tell you anything about it. Should probably go back and watch that one.
Alice Krieg is in it. Fred
Mhm.
Astaire. It's like a New England ghost story. It's almost. I mean, obviously we had Stephen King movies and
Right.
books at that time, but it's almost like a Stephen King story before Stephen King or early
Right.
in Stephen King's career. It's very much that kind of story. It's like about a group of writers who are together, like interested in ghost stories, and then this story and the story of this woman and what happened to this woman, and it's really well done. And talking about films from that era that maybe are underrated, that would be one. There's another one from the same era, also a supernatural, not slasher, called The Changeling,
Mhm.
starring George C. Scott,
Okay.
about a haunted house. And there's a very famous scene in that movie where sort of a ghost like bounces a ball like into into a room to a living character. Like you think there's nobody in the house, and this ball just kind of like rolls and bounces into his feet. And that's been a scene that's been parodied a lot and also repeated over the years since then. So it's sort of a trademark moment of early '80s horror cinema.
That is cool. Let's move on. Okay, so I want to move on to the 90s.
All
Um,
right.
uh, so things sort of change, right? Like, I mean, it's probably not as smooth as like 1990 comes and then everything changes. But like that's the era that I remember seeing, Blair Witch Project, and we
Hmm.
mentioned Scream, and I mean, there's a million movies that come out in the 90s. But what would you say, like, what defines the 90s, as different than what was coming out in the 80s?
So in the '80s, the protagonists were largely young people, teenagers who, were suffering the sins of the father because, their parents had killed Freddy and he was haunting them in their dreams, or young people at a summer camp who were being haunted, or babysitters, as I mentioned before in Halloween. But it was largely teenage. In the slasher films, Happy Birthday to Me, films like that. It was often teenagers or at least young adults
Right.
and those movies. I gotta be careful how I say this because I don't want to be rude. If they had stars, they were stars who might have been seen as past their prime. I mean, I love Donald Pleasance, but by the time he got to Halloween, you wouldn't say he was a box office draw. He was brilliant in the
Right.
film. The '80s films had people like Glenn Ford,
Yeah.
Gosh, who else? Leslie Nielsen was in some horror
Oh my
movies
God.
in that era,
Love
right?
Leslie
So
Nielsen.
it was like people who like were still working and needed jobs,
Yeah.
doing. But so in the '90s, horror films began to feature A-list stars
Mm.
in them,
Yeah.
making them more expensive. And we moved out of those locations like summer camps with teenagers into more professional or adult settings. And so this was the era where we got like the serial killer evolved into like somebody who doesn't wear a mask, but like who sneaks into your life and
Mm.
begins to harm you. So think about Martin Scorsese's remake of Cape Fear.
Wow.
Think
Yeah.
about Single White Female. Think about Pacific Heights,
Yeah.
The Temp, The
Yeah.
Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Now, when I wrote that book, some people are like, "Well, these are not horror movies." I'm like, they have all the same tropes,
Yeah. They're
but
horror movies. Yeah. They're maybe not the traditional. Yeah.
right, but they're not wearing masks, but like they're doing the same thing, and it like begins the same way. It's like they murder the pets, they go after the family members. It's all the same kind of thing, but it moved into those settings, and you begin to get A-list actors being in the film. So we sort of moved from young people and it almost being counterculture or youth culture in some ways to growing into a more mainstream genre. And that's why we got things like Silence of the Lambs. We became the serial killer was the most prominent monster of the 1990s. And you could say, well, John, wasn't Michael Myers a serial killer? Yeah, but he was different.
He didn't
It's like
talk to you. He didn't know who he was. I mean, maybe you do because I haven't watched all the Michael Myers. Does he ever talk? No,
he never talks.
he
No, no.
never talks.
He's just the shape. But Hannibal Lecter, of course, he's
Yeah,
going to talk to
smart.
you.
Yeah,
Very
he can talk
smart,
to
right?
you.
Exactly, right. So it was kind of the era of that talking villain. The killer kind of graduated from being, this shape to a more identified personality, I would say.
Why do you think
Um,
that was that we made that change? Do you have any idea?
I do think that horror movies were incredibly successful in the '80s. I mean, the number of horror movies in the '80s compared to the '70s, I mean, it just multiplied, it
Yeah,
exploded, and huge box office hits, like you said. All these franchises launched from Elm Street to Halloween to Friday the 13th to Chucky
yep.
to Hellraiser. Big, big, big money there, right? And then if you think about it, though, people our age, in the '80s, we then moved into professions ourselves and jobs, and we started to grow up and have different interests in the '90s. But obviously, we still liked horror because we'd grown up with it. So it was sort of a development that I feel like followed the audience of horror and being a little bit more adult. So much so that when Scream came out in 1996, it basically reiterated all the old slasher tropes, but said, no, no, people always said those movies are stupid. This is going to be a smart slasher film. And we're going to recognize that about these movies because you grew up with them. So we're going to make jokes about them and do twists on them. And we're going to subvert the slasher genre as you know it. So you can enjoy all the things you loved, but you've also grown up now and you get it, right?
Yeah.
You're in on the joke, right? You've seen all the same movies we have.
Right. That was the brilliance of Scream, is that it recognized that people were
Right.
smart about, and they knew the tropes, and then you could
Yep.
you could do the tropes and still be scary, but you were in there. And then the whole found footage thing came around. Now, I don't know when that first started. The first time I became aware of found footage was Blair Witch Project. And I remember I went to a screening of that. It was when I was living in New York and I was working for a magazine and, got invited to screenings. That was like one of the nice perks of those jobs. And I had no idea what this movie was going to be. Like, I just knew it was a scary movie. There was no press around it. There was that movie came out. It was such an indie kind of nothing movie. And I was like, that was like one of the scariest movies I'd ever seen in my life. And I couldn't believe how scary it was. And
I feel the same way.
yeah. And I think this part of it is like not knowing what to expect, which I think that always is exciting when you walk into a movie you know nothing. I always kind of like going to movies where I know nothing about. I haven't read a review, I've just heard some good things. That was the way I just recently saw that movie Weapons, which I don't know. We'll talk about that later if you like that movie or not. I don't know if you've seen that one, but
I have not yet.
You haven't seen Weapons yet?
I hate to admit it. I haven't.
No, it's okay.
It's been a
We
really
won't talk
busy
about it
couple
then.
months. My son went to college, and
it'll probably be streaming. But anyway, but back to Blair Witch Project. Was that like one of the first found footage? Like, what's the story behind that movie? Do you remember?
Okay, so yeah, so found footage. There have been some isolated examples across time. In the 1970s, there was a very infrequently seen film called Punishment Park.
Hmm.
In 1980, there was one that was kind of found footage called Cannibal Holocaust.
Okay.
Um,
What was
and
VHS? There was one that was later, right? VHS.
then in 1998, there was one called The Last Broadcast that was sort of like Blair Witch, where it was like
Mhm.
a group of filmmakers in search of the Jersey Devil. But
Right.
it was all sort of put together. The way sort of Halloween galvanized all of the slasher ideas into one, I would say, perfect package. That's what Blair Witch really did as well. And the thing that makes the found footage movies, I think, so effective and why so many people like them. And I do, I love them. I'd say
Yeah.
right now they're my favorite kind of horror film, is that they are experiential and immersive. And so remember, I was talking about how the continuum of film, it's like when movies start out, they're very artificial and theatrical, they're becoming more and more realistic. Well, now think about how far down the road found footage movies are. So it's like, yeah, it's like the camera is a player and it's just filming what's happening. You're not getting traditional cuts, you don't have a soundtrack. I mean, it's ultra realistic, and that does make it immersive in a very real way. But it also, to me, says essentially all bets are off. In the 1980s, they developed the idea of the final girl. You always knew there was going to be some young woman who was more insightful than the other characters, who was going to go up against Freddy or Jason, and she would win because she was smart, she was
Right.
strong, she was insightful. Well, the found footage movie says nobody needs to survive. The only thing that's going to survive is the footage and the camera, right?
That's
So it's like,
scary
wow.
knowing
So
that, yeah, that you
it,
don't know who's going to make it. Yeah,
right,
that.
right. And that nobody could make it.
Yeah,
Their footage tells the story.
right.
So that adds a whole level of
And then it's
horror that
kind of
what
happening in real time too.
right,
Everything's kind of, yeah,
exactly. Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and so like again, so you think about what a found footage movie does. It's like you can't really like cut to other characters at the same time unless they're like different camera unit. You know what I mean? Because it's like you have to follow through. Like you're with those three people, those three young filmmakers in the woods, and they're going around in circles, and like there's no escape from that. There's no escape hatch. For instance, in one of the most gruesome, films ever, Last House on the Left in 1972, Wes Craven would cut away to like these police officers having like ridiculous antics and then cut back to the really gruesome action. So you kind of had this escape hatch. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's a movie. But in found footage, you don't do that because you have to go where the camera is. So it's like you get no respite, you get no
There's no break.
escape. There's no break from it, right?
And
Yeah.
it's so
So
realistic too.
yeah, so it's super intense. I mean, the argument against found footage movies sometimes is that, well, in taking away artifice, they lack art because you don't compose shots the same way.
Mm.
You don't have the great soundtrack. Things like that. So there's always sort of a yin and yang to like how do people judge it or like it or not like it. But I tend to love them. I mean, there are a lot of bad ones, but I think there are some great ones like the Blair Witch, which is, I think, one of the scariest movies I've ever seen for sure.
Well, okay, from the 90s, if you had to pick, your three favorite horror movies from the 90s, what would you say?
Oh my gosh, that's so tough. Oh, Blair Witch is number one,
Yeah.
and I know that's a controversial choice because some people hate Blair Witch. Some people are like,
Really? Well, that's
oh,
just
they
because they want to be like cool. Like, I don't like Blair Witch. I like, this indie movie made in Sweden and like, I know those
well,
people. I want to kill them.
Well,
Sorry.
well, what they say is like, well, we never see anything, and it's like, and to me, like,
Yeah.
I say that right back to them. Exactly, it's so good because you don't see anything.
And
What's
yeah,
scary?
that's a true scary movie. It's
It,
all
it
in your
is.
head. Yeah.
What scares us is not what's familiar.
Yeah.
What scares us is what we don't understand or what we don't see. As soon as we see it and quantify it and begin to understand it, it isn't scary anymore. So Blair Witch to me is the top film of the '90s. Silence of the Lambs. Certainly for how it
Hmm.
impacted horror cinema, the creation of that incredible boogeyman, the Hannibal
Yeah.
Lecter, for Clarice Starling as well. I think is a fantastic and smart film.
Yep.
Uh, I'm going to have to pick a um, people are
There
going
we
to
go.
laugh, but as a horror fan, I have to say it's kind of a forgotten movie, but I absolutely think it's amazing.
I hope I've
People
seen.
Under the Stairs, Wes Craven. Again, I'm going to go back to Wes
Okay,
Craven.
you love
I,
Wes Craven.
I love Wes Craven, and so this was a film that was sort of a commentary. So you think like late '80s, early '90s. There are films like John Carpenter's They Live, and then Wes Craven's People Under the Stairs that were sort of commenting on the culture and like what the end of the sort of conspicuous consumption can't speak conspicuous consumption '80s were like,
Yeah,
right? And sort of criticizing, this consumer culture in the '80s. And I mean, certainly that's what They Live is. That would be Carpenter in '88. But People Under the Stairs was the exact same idea from Wes Craven about this idea of these people who have this house and they've hoarded all of the riches in their neighborhood and turned their house into a house of horror, but they've taken all of the money out of the community, and they're these like super rich, but like also psychotic, crazy people. And so somebody breaks into their house to try to get their money. And it's a house of horrors, that they can't escape. So
yeah, that
I
sounds
adore
good.
that movie for sure.
I love that. Sounds good. I haven't seen that. I see. This is good.
It's
Now
it's
that
cheesy though. It's a '90s movie, so it's a little cheesy by today's standards. But
are there
at the time,
are there? Yeah, that's a good question. Are there any movies that you kind of they're sort of classic, but then you go back and you watch them, and you're like, this doesn't really stand up. Like I love this when I was a kid, but when I'm
yeah,
watching this now, I'm like, I mean, Halloween I saw recently, that movie stands up. Like
it
that's
does.
scary. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's still terrifying. The way
Yeah.
that white mask just comes out of the darkness
Yeah, I mean, it's
into the floor.
scary, and
Yeah,
then there's something about because it's grainy and kind of 70s anyway that it just makes it
right.
even more scary. But what is like? Is there any movies that like you watch now and you're like, oh, that kind of doesn't really work anymore? I mean, I know that's kind of the same. That's kind of the when I go back and watch movies like Revenge of the Nerds,
Right.
which I watched recently with my son. I mean, that movie is controversial because it has like things in it that are so inappropriate. Like there's a rape scene, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really bad.
yeah.
But sometimes they're just not funny anymore. Like you're like, that's not
Right.
really that funny. I haven't watched Porky's, for example, in 40 years. I don't know if that one would stand up. Probably not. But I'm curious in the sort of horror movie genre whether
S-
certain movies
s-
stand up.
So I'm gonna get brickbats thrown at me because
Oh, here we go.
I still like the film, but I don't think it holds up particularly well. So I just read an article the other day saying like, is Dream Warriors the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie of all time? It's the third Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Yeah,
My answer, having watched it recently, is no, not at all.
not really.
No,
Doesn't
not
stand up.
really. No, it's not. It's kind of a mess. It's kind of a mess. It's imaginative. Its heart's in the right place, but
Did Wes Craven direct that?
no, I think it
No.
was Chuck Russell who directed, I
Okay.
believe. But that's the story where I mean, and I love the story. It's like teenagers find their power in their dreams and their dream powers, and they become the Dream Warriors and take the fight to Freddy. But like
Right.
some of the stuff in it is just so groany. There's a moment where they're in the dream world, these Dream Warriors, and a door appears before them into sort of Freddy's universe or whatever you want to say. And you see it's a door.
Yeah.
It's clearly a door. And one of the characters says, "It's a door." And you're like,
Ooh,
yeah,
that's
it
on
is
the
a
nose,
door.
as they
We
say.
can see and we all see it's a door,
Yeah.
But some of the, some of the moments in that just don't land. I mean, I hate to say that. I know people are gonna kill me for that, but it's a movie I absolutely loved. I've probably watched 25 times in my youth, but I watched it with my son not that long ago. And you're watching it with someone from a new generation, and you loved the film, and you're watching, and something like just absolutely
What do your
cringy
kids think?
happens.
Yeah, what do your kids think of
Yeah, and they're
horror
like,
movies? Do they
"Dad, you
like them?
like this?
Yeah.
You think this is good?"
I know
Right?
it's hard for me to get my daughter to watch something that's like pre 1991, in anything, but particularly scary movies because it's just their tastes are more refined. I don't know. They just have a different. They're used to a different pacing. I think it's like it's
Absolutely.
faster. Yeah,
Yep.
it's faster now. Um,
It is very much so.
okay, what's one of your favorite jump scare? Can
Oh,
you think of it? It's hard. You've seen so many movies.
my favorite jump scare. Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. I know, this is crazy because I'm going to like totally break the format of the show and say my favorite jump scare in a horror film is going to be from
That's fine.
2006.
You can no, you can be anytime. It doesn't
Can,
have to
can
be
I can I do that?
1990.
I don't think I've ever seen a jump scare better than the one in this film called The Descent,
Uh-huh.
which is an absolutely terrifying film. It's about a bunch of women who go down into a cave. They're like extreme sports people, and
Right.
they go. They're in my state, North Carolina. They go down to inside a unexplored cave in North Carolina, and of course they get trapped in it. They can't go out, so they've got to find another exit out of the cave. And they're crawling through spaces like this big, so it's highly claustrophobic, and that's nightmarish enough. But
Yeah.
about 2/3 of the way through, they find out that there are people living in that cave, and by people, I'm using that term loosely. They're sort of
Like,
creatures who've evolved from people who were trapped down there,
ooh,
and they're human in only the most basic sense, I guess. And
yeah.
there's a fantastic jump scare in that movie where they have a video camera, because in the 2000s everyone has a video camera in a horror movie, and
Yep.
it's got night vision because they always have night vision on. And so like they're looking around the cave through the camera, night vision, like looking to see if they can see anything, because it's completely dark, and they don't have torches, and they're out of flares. And like they sort of pan around, they don't see anything, then someone says something, they pan around to look at the other people in their party, and like right there behind them is one of those
Oh
things,
God,
just standing
that's
right
good.
there, like within inches of them. I mean, I think I threw my popcorn into the air at that. So I mean, it's a fantastic jump scare, and that's a great movie from a different era, I think, The Descent.
Are there any movies that you think are there any horror movies that you just won't see? Like, think of something like that are like what they call like torture porn, like certain movies that are super violent, like torture movies. Like, do you just kind of draw the line at a certain point?
So this is just like a terrible thing to say, but I am 55 now. So I began writing these books, as you know,
Yeah.
like I was like what 20, 25, 26 years old. I'm 55 now, and I
Yeah.
wrote horror films of the 70s, and horror films of the 80s, and I wrote
Horror
horror
films.
films of the 90s, and horror films of the 2000s. Horror films of the 2010s is coming out next
Oh
year.
my
But
God, that's
but,
exciting. Okay.
but on that one, there were some films like that were about sort of
Like the cat, like what was the one with there's some Japanese ones, like the cat human caterpillar, or was that
the human
human
centipede. So
centipede?
so I
Did you
did
see that?
watch that. My wife will never forgive me. I made her watch it, but there's a movie that like I just couldn't bring myself to watch because I knew it had elements of like pedophilia and stuff like
Yeah,
that, and I
couldn't
and
do it.
like
Couldn't do it.
I just couldn't do it. It's called like a Serbian film or something like.
Mhm.
I thought to myself like I have to remain sane in this world, and there are
Yeah,
some things that I just don't want to see, and at some point, you know, if
I'm
this
with you.
stops being fun, it stops being fun,
Yeah.
and
And I feel like
that's
some people just want to push it so far. I mean, there's some
right.
twisted people out there, but just want like, what else
Yeah.
can you show? Okay,
Right.
you go to
Right.
the darkest thing, and then it's
Yeah.
not even interesting. Then it just becomes gross. Yeah.
There are some things that I just don't want to see. Now, I did some. I don't want to imply that I chickened out completely. There was one that I'm still absolutely tormented by
Oh
from
God.
it's called Megan is Missing.
Okay. I
And
probably haven't. Yeah.
it's about a girl who gets like catfished on the internet and what happens to her. And I will tell you, I am still
Oh,
gravely
thank you for telling
disturbed.
me not to see that one. I don't.
So like, and unless you're willing to take that journey, don't watch that.
I
I
don't.
mean,
I mean,
the
already
direct and the
you had
director,
me
in
at girl that
fairness,
gets catfish, and yeah, I'm
yeah,
done. I
yeah,
can't
yeah,
even
yeah.
watch the Saw movies because I know there's torture. I don't know why the torture to me is like very unwatchable. I just can't. I couldn't even barely watch Reservoir Dogs. I can't. I just
Yeah.
can't
I
do
was
it.
able, some of the so I did have, when I wrote horror films of the 2000s, that's when a lot of that torture porn came out, like the Hostel movies and a
Yeah.
lot of the Saw movies. And for me, like some of those have value and some don't. So they're a lot like slasher films. It's like there's good ones and there's bad ones. It's like, and like the good ones you can kind of handle the gore because you feel like there's some prevailing reason for them.
Yeah.
And the bad ones you feel like there's no prevailing reason for it until it's just pandering to the worst instinct. So like the Saw movies, I'm real up and down on. Like I think some are good, and I think others are terrible. It just depends. Because to me, what the Saw movie should be about are like people who are like escaping these horrible traps. But what the bad ones are about is seeing people not. You want to see people not escape, and that's like where those movies end up breaking the rules. Sometimes it's like
Yeah. like,
A
wait a minute.
person figures out the trap, but because they're a bad person, they still don't escape because we really want to see them killed.
You want to see?
And if that's why you're watching the movie, that's a real pandering base instinct. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Movies
I don't
for
enjoy
serial killers are like, you know what? We need to make movies that serial killers would enjoy, right? So let's watch
that.
them kill people. Yeah, in a way that an enjoyable way. Yeah, that's interesting. What movie? I mean, what's the most violent movie you've ever seen? Are there any that come to mind where you're like, this is insanely violent?
Yes, yes. So in the 2000s, there was a movement in France.
Yeah.
It was called the New French Extreme,
Oh
which
my
should
goodness.
give you the idea of what it was. It
Yeah.
was like to just push past all levels of decorum and
Was
tact
that
and to just
the car
transgress.
movie? There was a movie that had a car. It was that the one. Anyway, keep going.
There may have been one like that.
Yeah.
So the High Tension would be one. There was a great movie about really like, I mean, badly behaved children attacking a teacher called Them, which is great, and I'd recommend
Really?
it.
Okay.
But the one that got me, I have never seen a more violent film. I think it's a great film, but boy, you better gird yourself if you're going to watch it and be prepared. It's called Inside. It's from
Okay.
about 2007, and it's about a pregnant woman alone in her house. And I think it's Christmas Eve. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I hope my details are correct. And there's a person who breaks into her house to try to steal the baby out of her womb.
Yeah.
And so she's by herself, and periodically throughout the film, the camera cuts to the inside of the womb. So when the protagonist, this woman, is being chased and she falls down the stairs, it cuts to the inside of the womb, and you see the fetus's head, in her
Oh wow,
belly hitting the stairs. And I thought, like, that's a whole new level of
that's intense.
violence that is very intense. I mean, it's a really well-made movie, but I'll tell you, I've never seen a bloodier movie, I think, in my life. And I watched it alone. I was begging my wife, "Come watch this with me. I need moral
Oh my
support
god,
to
you
get
have a
through
good wife.
this."
My wife literally couldn't even get through the first 5 minutes of Weapons was on. We haven't seen that one yet, but I mean, she couldn't
Mm.
even get through the first 5 minutes. I'm like, you
Oh
are.
wow.
She's such a. That's why my daughter comes along and then she's like so game for this stuff. She's got much more of a stomach than I do. I mean,
That's
I get.
great. You
Yeah.
need moral support to get through some of these.
All right, getting past the 80s and 90s. So I do want to talk about some of the 2000s movies. I'm curious what your take is on the Jordan Peele movies because I feel like he kind of had a nice fresh take on.
Oh, I love them. I love
Me
so
too.
I love Get Out.
Yeah.
And this doesn't take anything away from it because horror films are always acknowledging their history and legacy. But Get Out is like a straight up remake of the Stepford Wives.
Right.
Um, Even down to
Can
the
I do a prop here? My father did the music to the Stepford Wives. Thank you.
Hey, great
Hey, my
movie.
dad.
One of
Yeah.
my favorite horror movies of
And
the
I
70s.
think that he acknowledges. I think there's some
Yeah.
he's acknowledged that movie was a
Right, right.
hint to the
And
Stepford.
and that doesn't take away
No, of
from it. I
course not.
mean,
It's appreciation of a kind of forgotten horror movie. Yeah.
right.
My dad
Imitation.
also did a movie called Audrey Rose. I don't know if you remember that movie.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Robert Wise directed
Yeah.
about reincarnation,
Yeah.
1977.
Good
Really
one.
terrifying movie of the 70s. Oh my
Good one.
gosh, I need to.
Yeah, my dad did some cool ones. Actually, I'm going to think about them as we keep going.
So
But anyway,
he worked with Robert Wise on
yeah,
Audrey Rose?
Audrey Rose. Yeah, isn't that
Oh
cool?
wow. Holy cow.
My dad did more thrillers than scary movies, but he definitely did because he did like Marathon Man and Clued but he
Oh my
didn't.
goodness.
But Audrey Rose was one of the scary ones he did, and yeah, and Stepford Wives. I can't think of any other off the top of my mind, which is bad because my dad did 40 movies. Anyway, keep going.
No,
So we're talking about
I'm still haunted by Audrey Rose. That's a terrifying movie. That's
really,
another one that enough
it's
people
very
don't talk
underrated.
about.
Nobody's ever
Yeah,
seen it. Let's
yeah, it's
give
really
my dad some
scary.
residuals.
Yeah,
Rent Audrey Rose.
seriously. No, I remember being very afraid of it. Being very moved by it. It's a really well done film. But I mean, Robert Wise is great. I mean,
Right.
gosh, I'd love to hear it. What it
Yeah,
was
my
like to
dad
work
did
with
a
him.
lot. I know my dad's unfortunately not with us anymore. I'd ask him
Oh,
some
I'm sorry.
wise stories. No, it's okay. But it's a long time ago that my dad passed. Yeah, I mean, he worked with some great directors on their worst movies. Like he had a knack for finding directors that made their bad movies they did with him. So
But
like,
that's a wonderful legacy
it
too.
is. It's just wonderful.
That's great. That's great to be able to work with these
I
people,
know.
even
Or like,
and have that
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
hilarious.
wonderful.
So we were talking about Jordan Peele. So he did. So yeah. So Get Out is a nod to Stepford Wives for
Right.
sure, but not in a
Us,
bad way. Us is
right? Not in a bad way.
amazing.
Us is amazing. It actually references. one of my favorite episodes of the original Twilight Zone, which was called Mirror Image.
Hmm.
And that I'm trying to think. I can't right now. God, my mind is going blank. Vera Miles, I think, was a woman in a bus station who spotted her double,
Yeah.
and it was like the beginning of an invasion, like sort of from a duplicate or parallel universe where our duplicates were replacing us. And that's not exactly the story of Us, but that was his impetus to do it. And I think that's a great film. I think Us is fantastic. That's one of my favorite movies from last decade. And then, of course, I found Nope fascinating. I probably need to watch it again.
I think you're the only person. Maybe, yeah. Nope was disappointing for me. Although I did enjoy the monkey scene. That scared me. That was upsetting.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was very upsetting. So
yeah.
I watched it with my son, and I was sort of agnostic about it. I was like, I don't know if I love this
Yeah.
compared to Us
Of course, it's not as
and
good as the other two. Yeah.
Get Out. But then my son is like, no, Dad. He's like, and I'm like, well, what was this about? And he explained it to me. It's like, oh wow, maybe you should be the film
Yeah,
critic.
exactly. You taught
Right?
him well. You
It's
taught
like
your son well.
I'm getting old and losing my faculties or something because I until he explained, I thought, oh, now I get it. Right? Okay.
Are
What's
there
wrong
any
with me?
are there any movies you've seen in the last like 2 years that you were like, wow, that was, somebody who's seen like pretty much every horror movie, like were impressed by? I mean, I can tell you, I saw a movie, it hasn't gotten a ton of press. This movie called Strange Darling. Did you see
I
that?
saw that. Yes.
I
I
thought that was
really liked it.
so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it was
Um,
really good. It was very surprising. Went in some
Yeah, it was a
twists
good.
and
I'm not going to
turns
give it. It
there.
has a great
Yeah, yeah,
twist. It's told
yeah.
in a weird order, which is cool. It's not told
Right.
linearly, which was kind
Hmm.
of creative. Didn't
Right.
seem to have a very high budget, and yet incredible performances. And
Yeah,
if anybody
beautifully
has
done.
a chance, I think it's on all the streaming, or you can definitely get it on streaming. Strange Darling, I would really recommend that one. Um,
I'll double. I'll second that
yeah,
because I thought it was great. We picked that on some Saturday afternoon, and my wife and I watched it. Like, this is terrific. We
yeah.
were
Very,
absolutely.
like, to be like surprised by a
Yeah,
horror film, and for some
yeah.
reason it just didn't get that much attention. I don't know. People didn't seem to like pick it up somehow. It wasn't on the
Right.
radar. But
No,
has
which is
there been
very
any in the
sad.
last few years that you were like, wow?
So I'm trying to think. So it's funny. I'll be honest because I wrote so horror films of the 2010s.
Yeah.
It's coming out like in maybe March of next year. So I didn't finish writing that till
So you did
not so
because you had
so
to
so
write. You had to the 10 years of
so
films you
so
had to
so,
watch.
so I
A
so
lot of
I,
films.
I've been catching up the 2010s and I did see Sinners and I liked Sinners a
Oh,
lot.
Sinners was great.
But I've not seen Weapons yet, right? So that's
Okay, I
you
recommend.
know,
I think you'll like Weapons, and I want to hear your take on Weapons. I think you might like that one.
I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll tonight. I think I'm gonna watch Long Legs because that's one I have not seen.
Long Legs.
Um,
Yeah, I've heard that one's supposed to be really good. Did you see what was it? What was the one? Oh yes, Long Legs, the one with Ethan Hawke. No, what's the
no,
one
that
with the
I think
That's
that's
Black
Black
Phone.
Phone.
That's
Yeah,
Black.
I think I'm gonna watch that one too. I also want to see this new one that's told from the dog's perspective, which I
Oh
think is
wow.
genius. Good Boy. Have you heard about this?
No, I want to hear that
Yeah,
one.
it's a horror movie where the dog is the protagonist, which I think is absolutely a brilliant way to
Oh, that's great.
put a spin on a horror
So in the
story.
tens, is there anything from the tens that's really reaching out from you?
So I really, I do like folk horror. I really appreciated Midsummer.
Okay, I haven't seen
I
Midsummer.
really thought that was terrific. So I went through that decade, and there's some amazing stuff there, like Train to Busan,
Hmm.
um, which I think is one of the best zombie movies made in a long time, and it's very emotional too. So there were definitely some great ones there. Not as popular with some fans, but I think one of them is that's really good from that era. It's called It Follows. I don't
Okay.
know if you've seen that, but that's about this force. It's about a force that follows people after they've had sex. It's like a curse that follows you
Oh
if
wow.
after you've had sex, and you can't get rid of this force following you until you have sex with somebody else and you pass it on to them. But like if that person dies and they catch it, like it all comes back down the chain to you, and it, it's really scary. But there's those movies, those recent movies like Smile and Smile Too. Those
Yeah.
are almost like more popularized versions of It Follows. Without this.
Smile, yeah, I heard wasn't very good.
Yeah, it's like wow, you're taking the same idea, kind of that
Kind of like
curse.
popularized it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is 2022, but did you see Talk to Me?
No, that's one I still need to see. I'm so sorry. I know I
That's
feel so
okay.
bad.
I just curious because I like to get your take on it. I just,
No,
you know,
I would love to.
it's interesting because so I have a friend who has this house in the middle of nowhere in Joshua Tree, which is the desert of, and he's a filmmaker and he wants to film a movie with me and he wants me to help him write it. And
Yay.
the thing is we only have the budget to really stay in one location, right? Like basically his house. And
Right.
so what are movies? This is like for my own research, but sometimes the best movies sort of almost take place in like one place, or like
Right.
one,
Oh,
where people are like, yeah,
one setting. So
yeah,
absolutely. So, when I think about one setting movies, I think of something like The Farmhouse in Night
mhm,
of the Living Dead, right? They
right,
never really leave the farmhouse or the front yard or the side yard, right?
right, right,
Um, when you think about, now granted, this was a elaborate setting, but The Haunting, where four characters go into a house that's haunted and
yeah.
stay there for the
This
duration
is
of
like
the
a haunted
movie.
house story. Yeah.
Right. So that's always a good fit for like a single setting movie
Yeah.
is that, one of the things that we're looking at for our third season of Abnormal Fixation is that we're probably going to do a haunting type story because again it keeps like if we find one location we like and film there, it's better than like having like five different locations and running everywhere and having to set up and take down and
Right, right.
uh
It's just
you know
that's why the brilliance of Blair Witch Project, even though, it was kind of like pretty
just the
low
woods.
production
Right.
production expenses and good maximum horror.
Right.
Do you prefer um and maybe you don't have a favorite, like it feels like with horror, you're either gonna have the bad guys either gonna be like supernatural or it's
Mhm.
gonna be like real. It's gonna be a story of, somebody who's wronged, or
Right.
there's gonna be like a, a supernatural element to it. Is there a type that you prefer?
John, you're asking such good questions.
Sorry.
That's no, that's a really good
I
question.
think
So
about that sometimes because I'm even when I'm thinking about this movie idea that we're thinking about, like, do I want the killer to be somebody who, is lurking in the desert, or do I want it to be some spirit
right.
of, like there's a whole thing. Yeah.
So for me, and this is me, so I'm not saying anybody is wrong if they don't have the same opinion as me. I'm just saying like what really scares me um are the real
Yeah.
the real life things like the idea that you see especially in a lot of 2000s films like Wrong Turn or Wolf Creek, that like you're just living your normal life, or the Texas Chainsaw
Yeah.
Massacre, you take a wrong turn and something terrible is happening to you. The
Right.
Strangers, a terrifying movie from 2008, which I guess has been remade and there's a sequel to the remake, but
Oh,
I haven't
really?
seen those. But the original was really good.
Yeah.
So I tend not to find the supernatural particularly frightening because I think at some point you realize, like, especially now with the
Mhm.
kind of special effects that they do, like where,
Right.
yeah, a ghost will like yank somebody across the room, and you're like, as soon as that happens, dude, like, what are you going to do to defeat this?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. There's no,
and so
doesn't feel,
always in
yeah.
the yeah, always in the third act of these supernatural films, they come up with some way that they think is going to defeat the supernatural force, and it's always just bunk. It's like, listen, if it's doing all of these things, it's like reshaping reality. It's dragging you across the ceiling. It's changing forms. Like you're not gonna find a way to. It's very implausible you're going to be able to defeat something with that kind of power, right?
Yeah.
So I always kind of check out on those. Like they make them like Curse of La Lorna was like that. It's like
Mhm.
this was such a terrifying force. I mean, it's throwing people across the room, so you have those harness effects where the
Yeah.
actors are
Yeah.
flipped and
Flying
dragged
across.
across. It's like wow, and it happens again and again in plain sight of people. It's like, man, the only thing to do is get out of that house and never go back,
Yeah.
right?
I agree with you. I think the real, I just tend to find the real stuff a lot scarier.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
When we're talking, so
of course,
John
The
Carpenter,
Shining. I mean, there's some
yeah.
great, incredible examples of supernatural movies like that
No,
movie.
no, that's true. Listen, I'm not going to say there aren't great supernatural movies
Yeah.
because there are. The Shining is a perfect example.
Right.
John Carpenter says, the two types of horror movies are, the evil is sort of outside us,
Yeah.
an alien,
Right.
a ghost, or the evil is inside us. And that's something like,
Yeah.
that is like Michael Myers or Freddy, something evil in human nature that has spun out, and there's still
Right.
some sort of, different quality, but it's
It's
born
still
out of
human.
humanity,
Yeah.
right? And I find that very terrifying. Films like like Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, Straw Dogs, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those are the kind of Deliverance. Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
those are the things that give me nightmares, right?
yeah.
Because they are much more grounded in something that I recognize as reality and human nature, as opposed to like, oh, there's a ghost. Well, but we can't even quantify what a ghost is. Like we don't agree what a ghost is. A lot of people say ghosts can't even hurt people, right? That they don't. Some people think ghosts are solid. Some people think ghosts, are not. It's like, I don't know. And what do you do if you're fit? How do you defeat a ghost? Tell me, please. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Fire.
Right?
It's always fire. Oh, it's like
Burn
with
it all
aliens.
down.
Yeah. Like they don't like fire. All right. This has been so interesting. John, thank you so much for taking the time on Halloween, no doubt.
Oh, thank you. This has been amazing. There it is.
I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna close this out with my favorite music, except don't tell my dad this because he has the best music of all horror movies. But
of course.
This is a good one. But anyway, John, if people want to find out more about you, what should they do? Like tell us your website, etc.
Right. Well, I am at Reflections on Film and Television at blogspot.com. You can find me on Twitter at JK Muir or Facebook at John Kenneth Muir. I'm on Instagram as Household Lar. I've got a channel on YouTube for Abnormal Fixation and my audio drama Enter the House Between. So you can find me there. And of course, you can find all my books on Amazon.
Awesome. John Kenneth Muir. Thank you.
You got it right.
John Kenneth Muir, thank you for joining Small Talk.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, everybody who joined. See you next Friday.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween.